A presentation from KVIE, Sacramento. This program is made possible by this station and other public television stations.
It's wonderful to have you here with me this evening. I have been promised for years now, since I've been working with National Public Television, that I would have the privilege of bringing people in and sharing ideas with me. Up till now, I've done these lectures, and personally, I'm more excited that I have been able to form a little love class of people whom I know and who have been with me. Some of you have been in my love classes, other people I've known for years. And the one thing that we all have in common, and that I brought you together for, is because we're all, in the first place, beautiful, struggling, wonderful human beings. First of all, I'd like to talk about the vitalness of relationships and whether or not you feel that relationships are truly necessary. And if they are, why do you feel that it's so necessary for us to struggle to have relationships? I'm constantly talking about loneliness, and I know that I've experienced in the past moments of intense loneliness in which I have been compelled to open my arms and risk. And I'd like to sort of share with you some of the ideas that you might have. Why do you seek relationships? What is it about relationships? Why aren't we just satisfied with being alone? Does anybody want to speak to that? Yes?
It gives me a connection with the world, and also gives me a base, like my one-to-one relationship with my husband. I feel gives me a base, something to come back to, kind of centers me.
That's wonderful. You know, it brought in a flash to mind something that Robert Frost said, and that is, home is a place that when you go there, they always take you in. And to have someone in your life, just one person, where you know that if you went there, the door would always be open. They wouldn't say, "I told you so," but they'd have the Band-Aids ready. And they'd sit down with you and mend the little wound and then say, "Go on out now, Diana, and do your thing." I wonder how many of us have that person. And it frightens me that there are so few people in our culture that seem to be able to say, "I truly have one person in my life with whom I can be totally me and feel relaxed about it and happy, make mistakes, do dumb things, and yet be taken in whenever I come and knock on the door."
Sharing is so important, and I think that when you said if you go on a trip, you like to you see a blue tree, and the other person sees the purple tree, and it's so nice that you're there to see it together. And I think that when you go on a trip, it's so important to reminisce and to be able to share all those moments later. And I think that that's so important in a relationship, sharing.
Oh, yes.
By contrast, if I have an experience of deep sorrow, if I can communicate about it, I can get through it. And so that whether the experiences are the most wonderful or the most unpleasant, that sharing helps to complete them. And that's been my experience all my life. I make a contrast between loneliness and solitude for me is very wonderful, but it mustn't last too long, because there's just a very great need to share all sides of experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice.
I know.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know when I come home at night and I have anything on my mind, it's right away on my tongue, and I want to share that. And it's interesting. I come home, and the first thing as I walk up to the front door, I can see into the kitchen. And I can sort of see my wife in there, and I'm already telling her stories through the window. And she laughs and tells everybody that, when Norm comes home, there he is telling me stories through the window, because I got to get that off and have somebody to share that with.
Yes, and that's a wonderful source of to have somebody that you know you can say these things to, and then they become even more real. I find the same thing. I love the solitude, as you say, and I love experiencing things alone, but they become so much more exciting when I can give them to somebody else and say, today I saw, or today I did. That's the real joy. And we need people for that very much.
It's life, and people are also different, that their reactions to you help you in a lot of ways, and you hear a lot. I never know if when a guy looks at me, for example, is he looking at me because I'm different or because he likes me? You know, so to begin, it's kind of hard because you have to risk more than the other person does in finding out. And then if you're rejected, then you can hide behind a reason why you were rejected. It's up front. You know, you can't discard it and become somebody else. But I think I don't know, I like it. It keeps me going. It's life.
You know, Maria, while you were talking about that, I was thinking about my own fears, and they're very similar. I don't know when people look at me, if they're looking at me because I'm a kook, or if because they're attracted to me. I really don't know. I mean, maybe you feel it's more dramatic because you have a wheelchair or whatever, but I think, am I wrong to say that all of us wonder about this? And we have the same fears and the same insecurities. I would love to say hello to this person, but will they reject me because I'm not exactly what they expect me to be? You know, and it's a very interesting dynamic that you should mention this, because I think it immediately lit in me. That's funny because I feel the same thing.
Yeah. It's like magnifying everything.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's nice.
How do you break this down? How do you find out whether they're looking at Maria because she's different, or they're looking at Maria because they really would like to know this girl?
Well, I guess I take the time to find out.
How do you do it? So many
By-
people are saying to me all the time, you know, I would love to be able to go next door and knock at the door. I would love to be able to stop people on the street and say, hello, I need you. I would like to see someone in a restaurant eating alone and saying, would you mind if I joined you? I don't like to eat alone either. But I don't do those things because they're frightening. Now you say, I do them because they're life. How do you do them?
I do it in different ways. I take the time to stop and say, isn't it a nice day? Or always smile and choose to think that they look at me because, yeah, I'm different, but I'm also attractive in that I don't yet sit back or stay hidden somewhere or be meek. I'm me.
Yes,
And
and I might say that having known you for so many years, that's the one quality of all of your qualities that's the most magical. And that is that you say, you know, I am more than a person with a wheelchair. I'm Maria, and somehow or other that projects, and the walls crumble. I've seen them crumble. How do you all feel about this? I think we're touching on something that really begins, that's almost the beginning of how do you start relationships. I know I get letters all the time. I receive many letters from women or men who have just lost their partners through death, let's say. And they say, how do I start again? What do I do? Where do I go?
The big thing is taking a risk and knowing that if you take a risk and you don't succeed, 5 times, at the 6th time you'll succeed, and the 6th time you don't succeed, the 7th time. It's always the next time that you will succeed, and one time you will, but you always got to take that risk and always know that you will succeed. If it's, you just got to take that risk and not say no. You got to say yes.
And know that you have something that's saleable. You know, stand with dignity and pride and not say, I'm asking for things, I'm also giving things. I have something really wonderful to share. I think so often we're reticent and we say, well, what have I got? Well, you know, plenty.
I think that's the key, is to put yourself out and to expose your humanness and know that the person that you're talking to is just as sensitive and tender and wanting as much as you. And when you start taking that step, it opens up a world that you can start sharing with each other.
I think it gives you courage. I think if somebody starts sharing with me, then it gives me the courage to share myself. If she's been, you know, open and shared herself this way.
Yes.
Be willing to be vulnerable.
Oh,
Sometimes
yes.
Very hard to.
Oh, I think that's one of the keys to relationships, and that is vulnerability. If those of you, I think you've probably all read Love, and you remember that I finished that book by saying, the only thing that I really have to give you in love is my vulnerability, because love demands all of your vulnerability. Every time you step out, there's a possibility of your being smacked, but so what? You know, William Faulkner said, if I had to choose between pain or nothing, I would always choose pain. And so would I. I don't want to go through life dead. I want to experience it, and if it means getting smacked, then I'm going to recuperate from getting smacked, and I'm going to get up and try again, just as you said. It's got to be. To sit back and wait for people to come to you. Oftentimes it doesn't happen, and you wonder why you're dying of loneliness. We have to be the aggressors, oftentimes. And maybe it's frightening, but you still have to get yourself together and say, well, I'm going to try. 9 times out of 10, it will be a positive reaction. People are not as bad as we believe them to be or we hear on the media. Oftentimes you say hello, and you maybe 1 out of 10 times a person will say, mind your own business. The rest of the time they will at least say hello back. And if you ask someone in a restaurant, you know, you're alone and I'm alone, just for dinner, would you mind if I sat with you? Wonderful things can happen, but you have to be vulnerable.
You know, one of the several things, I guess, that Jesus said that has stuck with me is the fact that in order to find yourself, you must first lose yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, this is usually pretty irritating to young people because they don't believe that. They spend all of their time, especially now in this I generation, the B generation. But I think all of these things you talk about disappear once you forget that you exist and you throw yourself into some activity. I think the vulnerability kind of disappears.
Most of the really significant and important relationships in my own life have come out of sharing a significant task, where meeting each other and getting to know each other was just a marvelous byproduct.
Secondary.
But it was secondary. We both got into whatever this was because we both thought it was really important. We found each other there, and we formed just a wonderful, caring, sharing friendship that had the additional gift of a mutual purpose.
I have the feeling that so many pairs of people meet each other with the idea that I'm going to be vulnerable or that something's going to happen to me. Whereas if they just meet them because they're people, that's their goal. You got to meet them because they're people.
Isn't part of it our attitude about whether people are basically good or basically bad? And I think today with many of the headlines, it just seems that a lot of people get the idea that people are basically bad, and that, of course, would put us into a vulnerable position. I think it's easier if you feel that people are basically good to take that step.
And there's so little, Richard, being done to show us that people are good. And everything that's news seems to be of a negative nature toward the human person. I mean, we listen about crimes and we equate them to everybody, and we say everybody's a criminal, murderers, and so on and so forth. This isn't really true. It's a very small percentage of the population, and most of us are responding dramatically to this small population instead of realizing that most people you can trust and you can love and you can be vulnerable with, and they aren't going to hurt you. Indeed. And you know, you brought up something that I would like us to consider a little bit, because I think it's so essential for relationships, and that is this concept of expectations. Can we afford to accept or to expect anything from relationships? And if so, what? What?
I think it's very damaging to do so. If we project our expectations on other people, especially when we're first meeting them, it clouds what really is there, and we're not really able to see what someone else has to offer. And ultimately, we're going to be disappointed because we're expecting something that probably isn't there anyway.
And it channels that person into a very narrow spectrum, and it doesn't allow all the wonderful, beautiful things that they have to emerge. And I think that the relationships that I've struggled with the most have been those that where my limits have been attempted to be brought in, and I wasn't able to fit. And so I had to come out again and let myself be.
Oh, Diana, that's beautiful in terms of fitting other people's expectations.
But
I
you-
think that can be so very damaging.
And as soon as you expect somebody of something of somebody, you immediately are back to I again. You've got to forget I and just go and meet that person and see what they have to offer if you really want to. A little while ago you asked about loneliness. I think the real danger of loneliness is introspection. The fact that you don't get a chance to think about anything except I. You really got to look. I'm a very simplistic person, and my simple solution is that when you forget yourself, and you can put this into all kinds of areas, you forget yourself, you really begin to grow.
Yes. And you get into others by forgetting yourself. Indeed.
There's something we got to look at, I think, and that which is very important, and that is before you can forget yourself and before you can be vulnerable, I truthfully believe you must like yourself.
Oh, yes.
Because if you don't like yourself and you don't have a good feeling about yourself, you won't leave yourself be vulnerable at all. And so I think that's the first thing for a relationship is to like yourself, and then you can go on.
Except for one thing, I've watched a lot of kids spend a lot of time trying to like themselves. And their whole life is spent figuring out how they can like themselves. They never get past that.
I think that in a relationship, through that relationship, you can learn to like yourself. Waiting to like yourself, I think may waste time and energy.
Yes, living into the process,
Yeah.
rather than just sitting down and
Yeah.
centering yourself and saying, I'm going to spend the next 20 years loving myself.
I was thinking about the issue of expectations and the loving relationship between parents and children and parents, and the terrible degree to which expectations get in the way of that loving relationship, because as growth happens and as children become the people that they will be, inevitably they do not exactly meet the parent expectation.
I don't know if you're still guilty of it, but I still find myself trapped sometimes by maybe unconscious expectations of behavior. When I say hello to somebody, I expect them to say hello back, and when they don't, I get hurt. I have all kinds of, and I still have to deal with this, and I was interested, Gina, in your comment when you said, let go of expectations. That's a beautiful expression, but I would like to get more deeply into that, because I think there are a great many people concerned about how do we do that? How do we let go? And do we have any right to expect anything in a relationship? And if not, how do we ever learn that we don't? How do we let go?
Well, I think the first place to start is just with myself and trying to let go with all the expectations I demand of myself before I can go out and do that and just seeing that I'm okay, just like this anyway, before I can even move out.
Or you'd be like Don Quixote and have great expectations for somebody that maybe doesn't have any, but they live up to it.
So you mean sometimes we should expect, and then these people will respond to our expectations?
As a teacher, you know that. If you go into the classroom expecting big things, you'll get them.
It's interesting, Newt, that you picked my favorite character of literature to make your, I think, your excellent point. The thing that Don Quixote had that I think many of us don't have in terms of expectations, he also had no disappointments. If Dulcinea didn't meet his dream, it was all right. She was fine, she was wonderful. He just expected her to be a great lady. And eventually she came around to become one, but he was never disappointed. You see, too many of us get into the trap of saying, I expect something from you. Then you don't give it back to me, so then I say you're no damn good. But you see, Quixote never did that.
Well,
he always accepted.
I think the wrong word is expect somehow. He just assumed, I think.
Yeah, he was certain of it.
Yeah.
You are the perfect you,
and
and therefore all I need to do is wait and believe it, and it will happen. But that's a very high level of maturity.
Well, and there was never any talk, I don't think, on the part of Don Quixote about himself.
Well, there was. I think he was concerned a little bit about himself, but he was more concerned about the beauty of others and the wonder of the world and the great romantic thing called life that he wanted to experience to its fullest. And the fact that he had these unlimited expectations but no demands was just a wonderful way to confront people. I've been a teacher, as you know, all my life, and I always have expectations, but not disappointments. I always say that I lay things out and I say, come and eat, allowing people to select what they choose to eat, and then dancing up and down that they've eaten, and then showing them that, you know, the avocados are good, and the spinach is fine. You don't have to eat them right now, but maybe someday, and then do it myself. And through the process of modeling the beauty that Quixote was modeling, people begin to recognize the magic that he was creating, and then met his expectation.
I think it's important, though, in a sharing relationship, to communicate some of what we do expect, or and that's maybe the wrong word.
Don't worry, just let it go.
What we would like to have returned. Too often, I think, I take for granted things that my husband does around the house, and once in a while, if he reminds me of that, it's much easier to say, thank you for doing that, and I love you for doing that. And so I think it's up to us sometimes to express what we want in return.
And you see, it's such a basic thing in relationships, because maybe we don't even verbalize our expectations, but when we don't get back what we expect, then we have these responses that tend to break us away instead of bringing us together. You know, she didn't do this, and she purports to love me, or he says he loves me, and then he doesn't come home for dinner, and I expect him to come home, and he's married to me, and you know, he didn't send me the flowers for my birthday, and I at least expect that he should have the decency to, you know, that kind of thing. And so often it's the thing that breaks these relationships.
I'm remembering some training I took a few years ago that suggested that there are 3 elements in an upset between people: either unfulfilled expectation, undelivered communication, or thwarted intention. And that's kind of stayed with me, because there are a lot of simple expectations that if we just communicate, things work. And they're not the kinds of expectations that create problems at all, so long as they're communicated. There are other kinds of expectations that I expect you to be a thrifty person when you really are a very generous person. That's a kind of unrealistic expectation, or that, you know, I expect you to have very punctual habits when you happen to be the kind of person who never deals with time. You know, that's non-acceptance of some very basic characteristics of a person, and those kinds of expectations will always be disappointed. But I think if you say, you know, I expect to meet you at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and someone else agrees, yeah, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock tomorrow, that's a realistic kind of communication.
I'm always looking at statistics. They fascinate me. Something like married couples really communicate as little as from 10 to 20 minutes a day. Real, genuine communication. There's a lot of, don't forget the groceries and get the children and pick up the cars, but sitting down and having genuine communication, 10 to 20 minutes a day, that to me is awesome. It's no wonder, we don't remember who we are. You get to the point one day where you look at this person you've been living with and you think, who are you? Because certainly something's happening, you're growing, and if you're not communicating your growth, you're growing apart. It's essential that we do this. Please, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it touched a button that I feel very strongly about.
I think it's almost essential that two people in a relationship, whether it be a marriage or just any relationship, that they sit down and communicate verbally. These are the things that that really mean something to me, and really do that. I mean, on a very conscious basis.
You bet. Do you find, have any of you done this, and have you found it successful? Maybe you can relate. I think that I always define the healthy individual as that individual who has the greatest number of viable alternatives for all behaviors. And the more ideas that you have for meeting these needs, the better. That's why it's wonderful to have one person expressing himself, but it's wonderful to have 14 or 12, because you all have different approaches to this. What do you do about communicating? What has been successful for you? What has been a bummer for you that you found you're not communicating, or the person won't listen, or whatever it is? Let's get on to that.
Turn off the television.
Turn off the television.
I think sometimes it helps to write things, write how you're feeling, and sometimes just having that piece of paper and not having to, confront the person maybe at a very sensitive time. You need to write it and then, here, read this, and that helps.
Another thing with communication is to have special time with your other people every single day. It's the most precious and rewarding opportunity that you may have. And so often we neglect that, and no one is more precious to me than my family, my children.
Yes, we need to learn how to talk to each other.
I think the point that she just made, that it takes a conscious effort to do that, is something that we forget a lot. Maybe somebody's been together for 5, 10 years. They think, well, I don't have to put as much energy into it anymore because I know what's going on in that person's mind. That's not the case at all.
Oh, never. The minute we believe that we have security in a relationship, we're in danger. You've got to keep growing, and you've got to keep investigating, and you've got to keep asking questions, and how are you feeling? And there is no permanence in these things, because all of us are changing every day in some way. We're different, and we have to communicate that difference, our difference in ideas and feelings. And I found I just happened to have with me something that I found written by Anne Murrow Limburg. If there's ever been a person who has learned about communicating feelings and had to adjust to all kinds of changing feelings and talked about the impermanence, she did. And I brought the quote with me because I hoped somebody would talk about that, and I haven't done that before. But just a very short one. She says this: "The life of our emotions and our relationships is always intermittent. When you love someone, you do not love them all the time in exactly the same way from moment to moment. It is an impossibility, and it is even a lie to pretend that you do. And yet this is exactly what most of us demand of each other. We have so little faith in the ebb and the flow of life, of love, of relationships. We leap at the flow of the tide, and we resist the ebb in terror. We are so afraid that it will never return again. We insist upon permanency, on duration, on continuity, when the only possible continuity in life as in love is in growth, in fluidity, and in freedom. In the sense that dancers are free, barely touching as they pass, but partners in the same patterns." Isn't that wonderful? Because we always are demanding that a relationship be what it started as. Well, it will never be that. If you're expecting that, you're going to be very pained. But if you are constantly aware that everything is in change, everything is in flux, All of us, when we leave this evening, will be different than what we came in. Maybe even on an unconscious level. But the fact that we've experienced each other, that we've experienced this experience has given us something more. And it's that we need to communicate in growing relationships all the time, or you find yourself miles apart. She's dancing on this stage and he's dancing on this stage when they started the same ballet. And you wonder what's happened, what's gone on with us. So as Diane said, taking the time, sitting down and saying, you know, what happened? Norm's yelling what he had to say through the kitchen window because he can't wait to say it. I have that same feeling. I think that all the communication, being a teacher, you have an insatiable need to communicate everything you know. You don't care if people pick it up or not. You need to say it, you know, and that's what makes it exciting. So this whole process of learning again to communicate, to let people know who you are and what you are at all times in your life, and never assuming that the person knows, never wearying of saying, I care about you, I love you, you're important to me, doing it, certainly acting it out, but also verbalizing it. It's very essential.
There are certain times where just out of the clear blue, something will come up and you just reach this incredible communication. And it's like having a planned lesson. You plan it and it goes all right. But if you don't plan something and it just comes at the spur of the moment, it's like the most beautiful lesson. And it didn't even have to be planned or pre-prepared.
Oh, Joanne, that's wonderful. Because I think some of our most magic moments, in fact, I think in my life anyway, the most really, the peak experiences in my life have always been a spontaneous sharing, a very deep moment where two people really touch deeply. And that's something that you leave knowing that there's something different, there was something magical, and you grow, you leave those points change. You know, the existentialists used to talk about those moments as being existential moments. Moments in which you were congruent with yourself and someone else. Moments when you heard your own footsteps and you know they were your own. And you heard other people's footsteps and you know they were your own. And it was like a dance. And then you left that experience having been more, knowing the other person will be more too. And sometimes brief contacts, you form relationships that maybe it doesn't matter about the quantity. Maybe it's that marvelous quality that we need to experience too. And we always have to have room in our relationships for spontaneity. Planning everything moment to moment can be pretty deadly.
A lot of times those spontaneous moments come when you go away. Outside of the routine of your home, to take a couple of days or go up in the mountains or take a walk on the beach, they seem to come when you're out of your routine. And so I think you can almost create the spontaneous interrelationship.
You know, I've found, Marilyn, that like in my life, I can create my own spontaneity within my routine.
Can you?
Yeah, I'm always worried about people who go to work the same way every day and that go in the office and do the things in the way. You know, I'm always doing things backwards. I try a new route to work, or I try, when I get in, instead of going and sitting down and opening my mail, I go over across the way and talk to the secretary, or I go down to the student union and have a drink with some of the students or something. You know, I try not to fall into routines, because I think routines in some cases can be pretty deadly. Asa Joly's work in psychosynthesis, where he says most boredom arises from routine, and routine about which we're not even consciously aware. We're just doing the same things in the same way, and we're wondering why, what a dull day, where all we'd have to do is sit down and outline our day and say, I'm not going to, you know, I always point out that you, instead of getting out on the right-hand side of the bed, you crawl over your husband and you get up on the left-hand side of the bed, you know, and if he says, what are you doing? And you say, I'm changing my life. You know, I'm growing, I'm doing something different. That kind of thing. And then that produces the surprise, which produces the joy and the magic. Those are the kind of people that I find I like to have in my life. It's fine to have predictability, but I also like that crazy spontaneity that some people have, you know. You never can tell what that person's going to do when you're sitting back saying, oh my God, you know, but you love it. And it's wonderful. So I think there's room for both. And I would hope that we could bring into our daily lives, so much of which is spent having to do the necessities, you know, but bringing into them that magic of the first time, trying a new way, you know, get off the freeway and learn that there's another path that takes you there anyway, and may take you 45 minutes longer, but you may see some amazing things. And then you go home and you have something new to share. You know what I did today? I came late to work. What are some of the other things that you've, in working out relationships and trying to make them survive and last, that you've come head on to and you'd like to talk about and bring up?
I think there's something that I've been working on just recently with my relationships with other people. Or I've had ongoing relationships, and they're getting to a point where they're getting pretty comfortable, but there's areas that I need to confront, and I'm starting to confront a little more. And it's kind of scary, but there's times where I feel like I need to confront someone on something that they've hurt my feelings, I need to express it, or ask them about it. And then we go on, and it opens up new things and we grow more. But that's something that I've been learning about right now.
Is it scary?
Yes, it's really scary. But it's really exciting because I'm also learning to have faith in people or just life, because it seems like things just grow in a positive manner. It's kind of scary at the time, you think, oh boy, I'm gonna die. But it just, I've been noticing for a long time that things just do go in a positive manner.
And these confrontations and this honesty that you're striving for is cementing those relationships or breaking them apart? Both.
But cementing, I think the greatest growth comes from that, or else you have the stagnant, same old. It's cozy, it's comfy, but if you want to get somewhere and really, you know, get some depth and start really sharing, then I think you need to confront.
How do you feel about that? Does that make you feel uncomfortable or comfortable, or?
It goes back to communication, I think. And the heart of communication for me is your feelings. And once you communicate, you make a commitment. And if you follow that commitment with honesty and are not afraid to say, oh, you know, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, it really helps. But at the same time, I like to say what I feel. And if I don't say it, I get very nervous, you know. But say it in a constructive way.
Does someone want to comment on that? Maria's comment, go ahead and say it, but say it in a constructive way.
In a gentle, loving way. I'm trying that. Diplomacy. Yeah.
You don't want to destroy, you want to build, and you want to say, well, maybe it's not right now, or I've changed, or let's look at it another way, you know.
Yes, we don't want to put people in corners, and we don't want to devastate them, but we do want to express ourselves and our feelings. And I think there are millions of ways of doing that without being destructive. Saying just a simple statement like, yes, you may be right, but do you know how I feel at the present time? Is enough of an out, so that you're offering them rather, I've seen people say, that's ridiculous. You know, what do you say to that when somebody says that's ridiculous, or that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life? Well, just a presentation that there may be another idea that also has validity, but in a soft, I don't think we should ever do those things in anger.
That's easy to say.
Leo, very often I don't believe it's necessary at all times to even talk these things out with friends. And you can sense things with one another. There are vibes that go by. You know when your friend is perhaps disappointed or happy or whatever, and you read signals. And I think sometimes we talk things out too much. Sometimes you should be alert to sense a situation. It's much easier.
Exupéry said once, I remember, in The Little Prince, words can often be the source of the greatest misunderstanding. That maybe we don't listen enough with other skills, then maybe we would hear nice things if we watched people's faces and sensed what they were, or when the right time was.
Timing is such a critical issue in communication. There are times when you've got an important issue with somebody else when it's clearly not the time to talk about it, and it's so important to know that. And there are other times when it's just really easy to deal with the same thing if you sense that that's a time when they're not preoccupied or not really troubled about something else, or haven't just had a whole string of aggravating things happen. Then you can
Sure,
talk
some of the
about it.
best times to talk about things is when you're both as happy as you can be,
Yes.
going on that holiday, you know.
That's hard though, to find that, sometimes you really want to, say it, and you have to hold yourself back. It's really hard.
But even the holding back is part of the constructiveness of your communication.
Right.
The sensing and the follow through on what you sense and feel. It's all how you communicate.
So for this interpretation, I know Marilyn and I went through this a number of times where I would quote her on something that she said, and she couldn't believe that that's what she said. But how I received that, my interpretation, wasn't what she was sending.
Oh, yes.
And I think sometimes we hammer this out when we're married or have a close relationship, but with other people, we don't take that time. They receive it a certain way, and we don't sit down and analyze it and say, did you get it the way I sent it? And as a result, there is some communication that's lost there.
Yes, I often say, people say, well, but you're not asking people to define love or define relationships because that delimits all those things. And I say, well, maybe not define in that sense, but I know that oftentimes when I say to you, I love you, I know precisely what I mean, but you believe it's what you mean, and then communication breaks down. So maybe to some extent we need to define our terms and to say, I don't quite know what you're saying, please tell me or show me or whatever. That's because we need that to bring us together. Otherwise, we're going to be constantly at a loss. What precisely did she mean by that, or did she say? It doesn't mean you're asking when someone says in a great passion, I love you, and you say, define your term. But I mean, you certainly should be aware that this thing is going on. We're going to have to wind this up. And the wonderful thing about talking about love and relationships and caring and so on is that there is no end to the process. This is only really just a beautiful beginning. And I read something the other day again that I'd just like to share with you that I just happened to have brought. Some of you know this because I've used it often in love class. And it's written, nobody knows who wrote it, but I like it. And this is just the last two sections. It's called Don't Be Fooled by Me, and it's a plea to people to maintain relationships with me, even if I'm difficult. Try to help me to understand, open the doors of relationships. And it says this, if you want to know how important you are to me, how you can be the creator of my person, then you must let me in. You alone can break down the wall behind which I tremble, and you alone can see behind the mask that I wear with discomfort. You alone can release me. You alone can release me from my shadow world of panic and of uncertainty, from my lonely person. Please don't pass me by. I know it won't be easy for you at times. A long conviction of worthlessness builds strong walls, and the nearer you approach to me, the blinder I may strike back. You see, I seem to be fighting against the very thing I want the most. But I'm told that love is stronger than walls, and in this lies my only hope. I think that's a very beautiful place to say. You know, I love what the semanticist does. The true semanticist never ends anything with a period. They always end with and etc. And so I would love to end this evening with and etc. But before we do that, I'd like to also make a real physical connection. Can we just take our hands and appreciate each other?
This program is made possible by this station and other public television stations.